The open road, a symbol of freedom, adventure, and terror. For some, the allure of the unknown becomes a one-way ticket to a nightmare. These are the stories of those who dared to tempt fate on the asphalt veins of our world and paid the price. Tales whispered around flickering campfires, each word laced with fear. Tonight we delve into two such stories, accounts so chilling, so real that they'll make you think twice before offering or accepting a ride from a stranger. Remember, not all who wander are lost, and some are better left undisturbed. Turn off the lights, lean in close, let the terror begin. Rain lashed against Jessica's dorm window, a symphony of gloom accompanied by the relentless howl of the wind. Anxious, she watched the clock. Her ride home was late. Just as she was about to call her friend, a car horn blared through the storm. Relief washed over her. Grabbing her bag, she dashed out, paying little attention to the nondescript sedan idling by the curb. The driver, a man with steely eyes and a somber expression, offered a curt nod. Jessica slid into the chilled leather seat. As they pulled away from the university gates, the rain intensified, blurring the world outside into an impressionist painting of grays and blacks. Unease coiled in Jessica's stomach. The man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Miles turned into miles, punctuated only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the engine. The rain poured down relentlessly, creating a curtain of water that made the road ahead almost invisible. The storm seemed to have no end, and the darkness outside was impenetrable. Jessica tried to make conversation, but her attempts were met with monosyllabic responses. She asked about the weather, their destination, anything to break the silence, but the man beside her remained distant, his answers short and devoid of emotion. The man, she noticed, never once looked at her. His eyes were fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. There was an unsettling intensity in his demeanor that made Jessica's unease grow. The car suddenly lurched, pulling onto a deserted side road. The sudden change in direction jolted Jessica from her thoughts, and she glanced around, trying to understand why they had left the main road. Confusion clouded Jessica's features. "This isn't the way," she stammered, her voice tight with sudden fear. Her heart began to race as she realized they were heading into unfamiliar territory. The man said nothing. He continued driving, deeper into the heart of the storm. The rain seemed to intensify, and the wind howled around them, making the car shudder. Jessica's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. No signal. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They were completely isolated, cut off from any help. Panic clawed at her throat. She had to get out. The sense of impending danger was overwhelming, and she knew she couldn't stay in the car any longer. "Let me out," she cried, her voice barely a whisper against the roar of the storm. Her plea was desperate, filled with a terror she could no longer contain. The car screeched to a halt. Jessica fumbled with the door handle, scrambling out into the rain-soaked night. The cold rain hit her like 1,000 needles, but she didn't care. She needed to escape. She didn't dare look back. The fear of what she might see kept her moving forward, her only thought to get as far away as possible. Soaked to the bone, heart pounding against her ribs, Jessica ran until her lungs burned. Finally, she stumbled onto the familiar asphalt of the main road. Gasping for breath, she turned. The side road was empty, swallowed by the storm. Shaking, she flagged down a passing truck driver. He took her to the nearest town, where she called her parents. As she recounted her terrifying experience, a chilling realization washed over her. She couldn't recall the man's face. No matter how hard she tried, his features remained frustratingly, impossibly blank. It was as if he were a figure erased from a photograph, leaving behind only a chilling void. Section 5. Sam's spectral encounter. Sam gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the worn leather. The tension in his hands mirrored the unease in his mind. The highway stretched before him, a ribbon of black under the watchful gaze of 1,000,000 stars. Each star seemed to whisper secrets of the night, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The silence of the night was broken only by the rumble of his truck engine. It was a comforting sound, a constant in the vast emptiness around him. He was on his usual route, hauling cargo through the desolate heartland of America. The landscape was a familiar yet haunting expanse where shadows danced in the periphery of his vision. His headlights illuminated a lone figure by the roadside, thumb extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Sam hesitated, his mind racing with thoughts of caution and curiosity. He had a strict company policy against picking up hitchhikers, but the loneliness of the road often gnawed at him. The isolation was a heavy burden, one that made him yearn for even the briefest of human connections. Tonight, he decided, he would make an exception. The need for companionship, even from a stranger, outweighed the rules he usually followed so diligently. The hitchhiker, a young man with a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder, climbed into the passenger seat. His presence brought a strange mix of relief and apprehension to Sam. He introduced himself as Rick, his voice a low rumble that matched the vibration of the truck. There was something oddly familiar about him, a sense of déjà vu that Sam couldn't quite place. As they drove into the night, the conversation between Sam and Rick flowed easily, yet there was an undercurrent of mystery. Who was this stranger, and what stories did he carry with him on this lonely road? Section 6. Rick's Request. Rick was a quiet but amiable companion. He had a way of making you feel at ease, even in the silence. He spoke of his travels, his dreams of reaching the Pacific coast. His stories were filled with vivid descriptions of places he'd been and people he'd met. There was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of hard miles and harder times. It was clear that life had not been easy for him, and the road had taken its toll. Sam listened, finding a strange comfort in the young man's presence. There was something about Rick's voice, a sincerity that made Sam feel connected. As dawn approached, casting long shadows across the highway, Rick asked to be dropped off at the next exit. The request was sudden, almost abrupt. Sam agreed, a strange feeling of unease settling over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He couldn't explain it, but something about Rick's request felt off. It was as if Rick was hiding something, a secret that weighed heavily on him. Just up ahead at that diner, Rick said, pointing to a neon sign flickering in the distance. The sign seemed to beckon them, a promise of warmth and food. I can grab a bite to eat before I continue my journey. His voice was casual, but there was an underlying urgency. Sam pulled into the diner parking lot. The place looked deserted, the kind of spot where travelers stopped briefly before moving on. As Rick gathered his belongings, he placed a hand on Sam's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. It was a gesture that conveyed more than words could. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You've been kind." There was a depth to his gratitude, a sense that this small act of kindness meant the world to him. As Sam drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Rick walk towards the diner. He couldn't help but wonder about the stories Rick hadn't told, the secrets he carried with him. The sun was rising, signaling a new day. For Sam, it was a reminder that every encounter, no matter how brief, leaves an imprint on our lives. Section 7. A Shocking Discovery. Sam watched as Rick walked towards the diner, his silhouette fading into the growing light of dawn. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to him like a shroud. He decided to stop for a cup of coffee, hoping to dispel the strange melancholy that had settled over him. Inside the diner, he struck up a conversation with the waitress, a friendly woman with tired eyes and a quick smile. He mentioned Rick, describing their encounter. The woman's smile faltered, replaced by an expression of shock and disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That boy, Rick, he died 10 years ago on this very highway, hit by a truck driver who never stopped." Section 8. The Ghosts of the Road. The open road can be a lonely and unforgiving place. The open road can be a lonely and unforgiving place. It holds the echoes of countless journeys, some filled with joy, others with unspeakable sorrow. But for those who dare to tempt fate, the road can offer something far more sinister, a glimpse into the realm of the supernatural. Jessica's encounter with the faceless driver and Sam's chilling meeting with the spectral hitchhiker serve as stark reminders that not all who travel are living souls. The next time you find yourself on a deserted highway, late at night, remember these tales. Think twice before you offer a ride, and be even more cautious about accepting one. You never know who or what might be waiting for you on the other side of the darkness.